the Kentucky Wildcats. Joining us now on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines is Justin Rowland from Cats Illustrated. Justin, appreciate you taking your time. How are we doing today, man?
Great. Thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. We appreciate it. As we get set for this game this weekend, Kentucky's played one less game than Carolina. They are coming off a bye week. Two opponents in Toledo and Eastern Michigan that probably don't give you the best idea of what your team is, but a tightly contested game that Kentucky just came up short with against Ole Miss a couple weeks ago. 3 games in, what can you say confidently you know about this Wildcats team this year?
I think they did a pretty good job replacing players in the transfer portal. They have a couple of impact transfer defensive linemen, Myquise Humphrey-Grace and David Gusta, who are really good at getting penetration up front. The back 7 on the defense is probably not as strong as it has been at other times, but that front helps them out. And the big emphasis in the offseason was to improve the running game. You know, it's hard for Mark Stoops to coach Mark Stoops football if you can't run the ball. And so they hit the transfer portal, brought in a couple of running backs who have been good. They brought in some offensive linemen who have been big upgrades. I would say that, they've done pretty much what you expected them to do. We expected it to be a close win against Toledo. That was the MAC favorite, and they won. We expected them to be competitive against Ole Miss at home, and we saw Arkansas was competitive against Ole Miss as well, but they didn't quite have enough, and then they did what they were supposed to do against Eastern Michigan. But, you know, I think people are just waiting until they get into the meat of this SEC schedule, and that really starts this week.
Hey, Justin, it's Wes. Appreciate you hopping on, man.
You got it.
Give us your scouting report, if you can, of Cutter Boley.
Yeah, so he's a pretty interesting quarterback. I mean, he had some prospect pedigree. He was a 4-star recruit, in-state kid. I honestly felt like I didn't obviously, share this with anybody at the time, but when you watch him play, it's like he would be a really good quarterback for Josh Heupel. You know, he's big. He's got a big arm. He throws an outstanding deep ball. He navigates the pocket better and climbs the pocket better than you would guess when you kind of first watch him. He gets the ball out pretty quick for a guy with with such a big frame, but he has a couple of times maybe trusted his arm too much. You see a lazy throw to the opposite sideline that should be a pick six, or maybe he doesn't see somebody in zone coverage. And so this game for Cutter, we know he can hit the deep ball, but it's going to be about managing situations. As an inexperienced quarterback on the road, can he keep them in favorable down and distance situations and avoid the negative plays? That's what it's going to be about for Cutter.
Justin, it's Chris. Thanks again for taking time, man. So you mentioned the run game earlier. Let's dive into these backs that Kentucky has brought in, and Seth McGowan, who Shane Beamer mentioned he was familiar with the other day, and Dowdell. Kind of, McGowan had a really nice game against Ole Miss. I think 93 yards, a couple touchdowns. What's kind of the 1-2 punch look like right there, and what are the strengths of these guys?
Yeah, in the spring, I thought maybe Jamarian Wilcox was going to be the guy. He was their leading rusher last year, and he gave them some juice, but he's had some off-field issues, and he's not in the picture. But McGowan has been great. I mean, he's a very herky-jerky runner. He's a lot of arms and legs in his running, so he's not stopping on a dime. There's a lot of movement going on, but he can beat a fast linebacker to the edge, and he can break tackles in the tackle box. So he can do a little bit of everything. He's running extremely hard. He's come into this year with a lot to prove. If you remember somebody like Ray Davis, who transferred to Kentucky from Vanderbilt for his senior season, you can tell he's just got a chip on his shoulders this year. And he's a much more explosive and really overall talented running back than Kentucky has had probably since Chris Rodriguez. So I think he's a top 10. He's a top 3 or 5 SEC rusher right now, and he'll be in the running for some small conference recognition at the end of the year at this rate.
Hey, Justin, it's Jack. Appreciate you joining us. It seems like Kentucky likes to use their tight ends a bit with Josh Gaddis and obviously Willie Rodriguez as well. From your perspective, how much have they actually incorporated the tight ends into their offense? Is it kind of a focal point in your eyes?
A huge amount. And here's the funny thing, and this is no knock, but Vince Morrow was a big name on the Kentucky staff for a long time. He went to Louisville this offseason to be in their program general manager. But They never really used the tight ends a lot until this year, and it looks like offensive coordinator Bush Hamden is leaning heavily on Josh Caddis, who has made some really contested catches. He was known more as a blocker, just kind of like a powerful run-blocking extra lineman early in his career, and he's just shown great hands, and Willie Rodriguez is a matchup problem as well. I will say this. There's not a lot of margin for error in that tight end passing. There's been a lot of balls fit into tight windows and tight ends making great plays, and that's a positive. But some of that is also they were not able to replace Dane Key and Barry and Brown from the transfer portal. You know, if you're Kentucky, you're going to have a hard time replacing one of those guys as a wide receiver. You know, and they lost two difference makers, two needle movers who are go-to guys in Nebraska and LSU respectively this year. And they brought in like Troy Stellato from Clemson and Kendrick Law from Alabama and J.J. Hester from Oklahoma. But, you know, if a guy didn't have a breakout as a fifth-year senior at one of those football factories, what are the odds he's going to be a needle mover at Kentucky in a one-and-done kind of contract year? And we've seen that they just had to lean more on the tight ends this year.
Again, talking to Justin Rowland of Cats Illustrated here on the AAA Heating and Air phone lines, previewing the Kentucky Wildcats ahead of Saturday's matchup with South Carolina. You mentioned Bush Hamden there a moment ago, and I think it's interesting because we've had our own conversations plenty in the first couple weeks of the relationship between the fan base and Mike Shula to start the season. It seems like Kentucky fans are none too pleased with year number 2 of Bush Hamden and how things have started off so far. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah. Well, there's been all kinds of problems. I mean, there's been problems getting the ball snapped coming out of a timeout, operational issues in the 2-minute offense trying to score before halftime. You know, when the passing game is what you would expect from a Mark Stoops passing game. You know, teams have a scarcity of time and attention and playbook retention and all these things, and Stoops wants to be able to run the ball, control the clock, set your defense up well with complementary football, and the passing game is simply kind of a victim of that. You probably have a similar dynamic at Iowa where the way that you build your team, the way that you want to construct to win, it's not going to be a perfectly balanced approach, and that just makes it hard to throw the ball at Kentucky. I feel like Liam Cohen, you know, taking off so much in the NFL right before Bush Hamden gets there probably shines the spotlight a little bit more on some of the deficiencies, because before that it was like, well, maybe Stoops is the issue and maybe it's not the offensive coordinator. I think Stoops is definitely a part of it, but you contrast what Cohen did with limited resources with Hamden, and it has definitely been a step down so far.
Justin, kind of a big picture type of question. How important is this game for Mark Stoops and the temperature around the fan base with, I mean, obviously that buyout's pretty big, but, like, I mean, this is a big year for Kentucky in that, like, if it's a bad year, I mean, I don't know. Like, how much does Kentucky need to win this game on Saturday just for Mark Stoops' sake?
You know, I talked to Chris about this for content on our site this week, and he talked about how the difficulty in talking about a must-win game. You know, in this day and age, what does it mean to be a must-win game when your coach has all the leverage with a $30 million buyout? And it's 75% of whatever is owed, so it'll go down a little bit after this year, down a little bit after that. But I think Kentucky fans are frustrated enough that even if they were to win a close game on the road at South Carolina, they would still be looking at the rest of the schedule and being like, okay, well, we still need to see a little bit more. But no doubt, given how the last couple of years have gone in conference play, if they are able to control the clock and play the way that Stoops wants to play and maybe win the kind of way they beat South Carolina a few years ago, then people would be interested in October at least.
Justin, got another one for you here on the defensive side of the ball. You know, you're talking about Mark Stoops and kind of the hallmarks of the offense and some of the struggles that they've had. Defensively, you know, that's been his calling card, right? He recruits to a certain style. He recruits to a certain body type. And he's had a lot of really good defenses there over the years. How does this one stack up? I mean, you mentioned the secondary maybe taking a step back, some of the guys they brought in up front, but is this kind of your typical Mark Stoops defense? What have you seen good and bad from that group so far?
The portal era has been a big test to the Mark Stoops approach at Kentucky because it was a lot about culture and retention and development and strength training. paying off after a guy's been in the program 2 or 3 years. And you don't get as much time to mold someone and put your stamp on what he's going to be as a football player this way. So it's a differently constructed defense. They typically lean heavily on their starters, and they went into this year saying, we're going to ask guys to go be great for 15 to 30 snaps instead of letting this guy play 80% of the snaps in the game. So they've been rotating a lot more guys in. There's not one pass rusher they're relying on. There's Sam Green and Cam Olds and Steven Souls, and they're all very different kind of pass rushers, strengths and weaknesses. They're not as big, like hulking big up front. You think about like Deion Walker last year and Trayvon Ribka. I always tell people the best thing Kentucky does under Mark Stoops is recruit to scheme on defense. They don't recruit guys that are as big and fast as Alabama or Georgia, but they get the guys who have that kind of size, and then they work on them for a couple of years. And key to what they do is stopping the run with a big front and then keeping everything in front on the back. They're not as big up front, but they probably get more of a pass rush organically. They really generate pretty good pass rush from every level of the defense with Brad White's blitz packages. But we've seen struggles in coverage. Against Ole Miss, they gave up over 100 yards just on hitches. And then they got beat on a hitch and go for a very long touchdown against Eastern Michigan. So it seems like they're covering up some questionable defensive back play, and that will definitely be a test this weekend if Sellers can extend plays.
Hey, Justin, about a minute and a half before we got a hard break. Give us maybe, if you can, a couple keys to victory here for either side that just will determine the game.
Yeah, Kentucky's hope is that South Carolina is a big play team that has struggled with efficiency, and if Kentucky leans heavily into the efficiency thing, then you can really see them kind of creating a kind of game that they're comfortable with, a game that they can control and they've won before. South Carolina, you're also dealing with a very inexperienced quarterback who has had a penchant for making bad decisions in Cutter Boley. So South Carolina needs to make it as much about Cutter Boley's got to beat us as possible, and Kentucky needs to take away the run game and just hope making South Carolina one-dimensional. Whatever happens there, Boley's inexperience or South Carolina one-dimensional, I think that's going to be who wins the game.
Last about 30 seconds here. How do Kentucky fans feel about Carolina being one of the annual opponents going forward?
I think they totally understand it. I mean, this is a series that has gone in. I think it's an interesting series because it's not like a natural rivalry, but you have two programs that South Carolina's been higher than Kentucky has been at their best, certainly. But they're kind of looking at each other like this is a game we need to win for us to be where we want to be in the SEC. And so, yeah, I think the way that it's gone in streaks and swings from one team to the next has kind of made it a little bit more bitter, too.